Have you ever wondered what happens when a planet's clock strikes zero? When a breath held for millennia is finally released? This is not a battle of man against man, it is a battle of engineering against time. We built empires of steel and glass, believing them eternal. Nature needed only a day to turn them into tombstones. It wasn't an explosion, it was the planet's scream. And as the darkness fell, the real war began. The war to reclaim the light. Beneath one of Earth's most beautiful faces, a giant stirred in its 1,000-year sleep. The first signs were not warnings, they were curiosities. The instincts of the wild feel what the logic of man denies. The giant's breath began to leak, carrying with it the scent of the underworld. The sky was the only way out, and they knew it. The numbers on the screen were not lying. They were writing the first chapter of the apocalypse. From orbit, our mechanical eyes witnessed the planet's fever. It was the heartbeat of a giant, and it was getting faster. Man, always the last to realize he is standing on the brink. The words they had hoped never to speak were now their only hope. The greatest evacuation was not of people, but of knowledge. Humanity retreated into the earth, surrendering the surface to the coming wrath. When the symbol of constancy falls, all rules become meaningless. Water, the source of life, now became a sign of death. An exodus without a command, driven only by pure instinct. This was merely the overture. The machine's eyes, impassive witnesses to the collapse of a world. The night came not from the west, but from below. The last fragile beauty before it was erased. The quiet before the storm. The last breath of the world we knew. And then the earth opened its eye. There was no fire, no lava, only pure darkness unleashed from hell itself. The planet had just punched itself, and all life on the surface felt the impact. The titans of titanium, humanity's pride, became fragile toys. This was the most primal fury, a force that could not be negotiated, could not be stopped. Our strongest works were but dust before the anger of creation. The storm created its own lightning, a hell on earth. Death fell from the sky, gentle and inescapable. The last of the artificial lights were finally conquered by the primal dark. In an instant, every machine became useless. Only the feet could be trusted. Humanity was disconnected. For the first time in a century, we were alone again. From a position of safety, they were the ones who felt the most helpless. The shock of the blow traveled through both land and sea. The water supply for millions was poisoned in a matter of hours. The symbol of economic power was now just a pile of rubble. The sky, the road that connected the world, was now closed. Even the rain became an enemy. The fight for life now depended on the last few volts of electricity. History repeats itself, not with lava, but with gray silence. The curtain began to fall upon the entire globe. The disaster no longer belonged to one nation. It had become the shared inheritance of all humankind. The global economy, a complex structure built on faith, evaporated in minutes. Even the deepest places where light could not reach could not escape this darkness. The planet's siege was tightening, turning orbit itself into a war zone. The darkness did not need to cross the ocean. It simply flew above it. Our attempts to control nature now aided in its destruction. We sealed away the past with the fragile hope that the future would have someone to open it. For the first time, we listened to our planet, not to find life, but to witness it fade. The final silence came not from nature, but from technology. Act 1 was over. The giant had roared, but the worst had not yet begun. This was not the end. This was the transformation. The curtain had fallen. A winter decreed not by Earth's orbit, but by its own anger. The global temperature began to drop. Summer was stolen from the calendar. The lungs of the planet began to suffocate. The great engine of photosynthesis had stopped. The foundation of the ocean's food chain collapsed. The silence spread even to the seabed. The agriculture that fed billions died young. Famine was the next enemy. Man tried to fight the darkness with electric lights, a desperate attempt to cling to the old order. The collapse of civilization begins not with a gunshot, but with the silence of an empty supermarket aisle. Our efforts to harness clean energy were extinguished by the very planet we tried to save. The global supply chain, the lifeblood of the modern world, had stopped beating. The knowledge of millennia, buried in silence, waiting for readers who would never come. Even stone and metal had to weep for the world that was lost. In this new world, all creatures became refugees. For the survivors, the outside world became an abstract concept. When technology fails, man returns to his most primal fear, thirst. The monuments that watched civilizations rise now watched one fall. The roads that once connected us were now just scars on a dying planet. The age of artificial light had officially ended. Our planet was building its own atmospheric prison. The ghosts of a more playful world still lingered. The new ice age had arrived, not in millennia, but in mere months. walls built to keep men out were now meaningless against a greater enemy. Fire had given way to ice. The planet was healing its wound with shock therapy. The last whispers of the old world adrift in a sea of static. This was the world after the end, or perhaps before the beginning of something new. From above, the Earth looked asleep. But beneath that shroud, humanity's greatest war for survival was being fought in silence. When the real sun was hidden, mankind had to create suns of its own. The future of humanity lay in these tiny seeds, nurtured by machines. The war was no longer about escaping, but about rebuilding, 1 megawatt at a time. Sending mechanical eyes where man could not go. This war would be won with information. Hope in the new world was not an emotion. It was a data point. Harnessing the power of the stars even when we could no longer see them. A war measured not in days but in decades. In isolation, machines became their own society, the silent guardians of humanity. Life, even in its most humble form, always finds a way. We brought the Garden of Eden underground. The memory of the lost world became the blueprint for the future. Humanity was no longer a global society, but a constellation of survivors. Even in the deepest dark, we never stopped searching for the light. The planet was beginning to breathe again, a weak breath, but a hopeful one. After decades, a crack appeared in the atmospheric prison. Time became an ally, eroding the planet's veil. The first step back into the world. For a new generation, a blue sky was only a myth. The giant slept again. It left behind a scarred world and a humanity forever changed. The catastrophe reshaped our planet, but how we faced it reshaped us. The question was never if we could survive, but if we deserved to.